Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have attorney Mark Zaid with us today. We'll chat with Mark in just a second. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and to be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Mark Zaid is a Washington, D.C.-based attorney specializing in crisis management and handling administrative and litigation matters relating to national security, international law, foreign sovereign and diplomatic immunity, and the Freedom of Information and Privacy Acts. His clients typically include former and current federal employees, particularly intelligence and military officers, defense contractors, whistleblowers, and members of the media who have grievances, have been wronged, or are being investigated by agencies of the United States government or foreign governments. Mark is also the executive director and founder of the James Madison Project, a Washington, D.C.-based organization with the primary purpose of educating the public on issues relating to intelligence gathering and operations, secrecy policies, national security, and government wrongdoing. And he is an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins University in the Global Security Studies program and at Texas A&M's George H.W. Bush School of Government and Public Service, where he teaches on national security issues. Mark, welcome back into the back room.
Thanks, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with the news a few days ago that Donald Trump revoked your security clearance. What is the overall significance of this?
The overall significance is retaliation, retribution, vindictiveness. That's what it comes down to. So I have still now, half a week later, not received any official or formal notification from the U.S. government. I only know what the New York Post wrote last Saturday. And we can get into some of the weeds of it. I was among a group of people who was reported to have lost their clearance, several of whom don't even have a security clearance, to include Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York. Alvin Bragg maybe had one as the DA of New York. I imagine he cooperated on federal matters. But the key thing for all of the people, and I was honored to be among most of them, neutral on perhaps some of the others, because I don't know either Bragg or James, and I have my differences with respect to some of the things that they did with respect to their cases, but that's a separate matter. They were all government Democrat officials at some point in time and their roles. I'm not. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I've been a registered independent my entire life. I have represented Democrats and Republicans at all levels, including into the most senior, cabinet officers, secretaries of defense, national security advisors, congressmen, more Republicans, frankly, in the senior positions than Democrats. And I've never been in the federal government. I've never been in a political appointed position at all. All I ever do is act as a lawyer representing clients to chase, pursue, obtain, remedies under the rule of law. So it was interesting to watch how some media outlets spun it, of course, like Fox and some others that were just ignorant, where they're like, Democrats' security clearance is stripped. And I'm like, no, it's not.
So let me ask you this for clarification purposes. My assumption is that if someone gets their security clearance stripped, that they are, to your earlier point, officially notified of that. The fact that you haven't been notified, does that in any way mean that what the Post reported may not be true?
Well, I think a lot of what they do is in the Trump administration right now is show, and maybe they'll get around to it. So I represent 8 of the 51 signatories to the Hunter Biden laptop letter from 2020. That was the subject of an executive order the first night of President Trump's assumption of office. And it purports to revoke all of their security clearances as well. Again, most of them don't have security clearances any longer. They've since retired or they're not using them. And none of them, to my knowledge, at least not my clients, have received any official notification of any type of action. Now, ironically, a week from now, I will be teaching for I think the 20th straight year, the District of Columbia Bar Association's continuing legal education class on security clearances. I teach other lawyers how to deal with security clearances. And I would normally, and all of us would be entitled to due process if, in fact, our clearances were revoked. There are some apparent open questions that colleagues of mine have raised with me that honestly I don't have the answer to, because we've never had the president of the United States say such and such person will lose a security clearance. I'm not aware of it. I don't know, maybe back in the 50s, who the hell knows? So it's unclear what will happen. I will say that why I was apparently listed, and I expected this, but why they publicly said I was listed was for my representation of the intelligence community whistleblower during the first Trump administration. This was the complaint that led to Trump's first impeachment. I was co-counsel. My colleague, Andrew Buckeye, who works with me all the time at Whistleblower Aid, who's been a client of mine because he was a whistleblower at the CIA who was unlawfully retaliated against. He was actually the first lawyer in the case weeks before me. He did and helped with the drafting of the complaint, not me. Not that I want him to be disciplined or punished in any way. I'm happy to take the hit for him. But the point of it is that was in 2019. They say that my role in that fake whistleblower case, which we followed the law in pursuing, means I'm untrustworthy. A year after that, I represented the highest level whistleblower in modern times, who was the acting undersecretary of intelligence at the Department of Homeland Security. He was blowing the whistle on the two people above him, the acting secretary, the acting deputy secretary. Can't go higher than that. And in or as part of that case, the Trump administration increased my security clearance up to different compartments so that I had a top secret, sensitive, compartmented information, or as people have heard it in television, TSSCI. That's the highest level clearance there is. Now, there are different compartments that people can get that are higher level, obviously, from a classification standpoint, but that we only have 3 levels of clearances: confidential, secret, top secret. And TSSCI is the highest clearance level. And it was the Trump administration who approved that access for me, notwithstanding the fact that they say I was untrustworthy in, fabricating a whistleblower complaint the year before. So the inconsistencies and the, ridiculousness of this is just overwhelming.
What does it mean materially in terms of you being able to successfully do your job, if in fact your security clearance has been taken away?
Yeah, the sad irony of it is that who it hurts more are those who work inside the Trump administration, including senior officials there who may need my assistance as one of the most experienced lawyers who deal with classified information that are on the outside in the private sector. It will make my life more complicated, difficult. There are cases, obviously, now I can't take. Normally for the last almost 30 years, 25 plus years, I've represented employees of the CIA who are covert. They are spies. They are real spies. They are American spies. And their very affiliation to the CIA is classified. And I was one of the few lawyers they could come to and get permission to talk to and represent them in a totally generally non-political issue, right? They got a DUI. They're having their job terminated, whatever it might be, just, things that nobody in the public would ever learn about, or maybe they're whistleblowers and maybe they would learn about it. So I can't take those cases.
Does that mean you no longer, like in the discovery process, have access to the kind of information that you need to defend a case?
I wouldn't even be able to contact the CIA to say I represent the individual because that affiliation itself is classified. And if
Mm.
the employee told me that they work at the CIA and I'm not authorized to know that, they've now committed a crime. So, I mean, it even goes beyond the fact of, oh, I can't get access. Sometimes, very often, quite frankly, all I needed to know was the affiliation component of the situation, because what they were facing had nothing to do with their operational activities inside the CIA. Like, maybe they got what's called involuntarily curtailed. They got pulled back from a geographical location somewhere else in the world that they were doing operations. I don't necessarily need to know what country they were in. I just need to know why they were pulled back. Oh, they were pulled back because they were deemed insubordinate to their supervisor when they cursed them out. Okay. I mean, that's not going to be classified that back and forth. It will be classified because of the culture that it is, the context that it is. But standing alone, I'd be able to tell you, I represented a CIA employee who cursed out their boss and was charged with insubordination. None of that would be classified, but I wouldn't be able to go that step. Now, the big thing, and the Washington Examiner did a nice piece yesterday, and that's a to the right publication, although they're not pro-Trump in any particular way, but they're to the right, conservative. And this one reporter or opinion editorialist wrote a piece of how this hurts actually the Trump administration by revoking my clearance if it in fact happened. And I'll give you one example. And we might have talked about it the last time. I represent many victims of anomalous health incidents, what the media calls Havana syndrome. I don't like the term. AHI is what we call them officially. And much of what I've been doing, which I've been doing for over a decade for these victims, and these are people who work inside the federal government at all levels, many different agencies, most of whom are spies. I have been taking whistleblowers from within the intelligence community up to Congress, predominantly to meet with Republicans, not Democrats, without the knowledge, or sometimes with the knowledge of their agencies. And we were providing protected disclosures to Congress of the fact that the Biden administration, because this is all in the last 4 years, the Biden administration's intelligence community was covering up information and evidence surrounding what happened to them. And I can't do that now because that was at the top secret level. My participation in those meetings was highly classified. And the only reason and ability to do that was because I had my clearance. Now, that, again, hello, Trump administration, I was identifying faults in the Biden administration, and you just took that opportunity away from me to help you, the Trump administration, turn the tables on the Biden administration if that's what you want. Frankly, AHIs have nothing to do with politics. They've been going on for decades, but and I can put blame on every administration, but nonetheless, that ability to represent those victims, that has partially lapsed or been taken.
And to call this as it is, what they're doing, isn't it just a de facto means of denying someone's due process? If their lawyer can't do the job?
Yes, and sure. And I mean, presumably, look, hopefully someone could find another lawyer. But the reality is there are few of us. I mean, I have more experience than most. Most of my colleagues who have clearances, it was because they were in the U.S. government and they may still have eligibility. There's very few of my peers who do clearance work or employment work who have clearances, just because it's just not necessary. Not that they wouldn't be eligible or entitled to it. It's just not necessary. And quite frankly, it's a pain in the ass. It complicates things. I got to remember what is and is not classified, and hopefully never say anything that would be inappropriate. And I hope I've never done that. And I certainly strive never to do that. The Whistleblower Aid, the organization I co-founded back in 2017, was for the purpose of taking national security whistleblowers through the system properly, lawfully, So there would no longer be another Ed Snowden or a Chelsea Manning, who I will say I represented in her last book because she did things the right way to have the book reviewed, but not to release classified information without authorization. That is not what anyone wants. No one who works with me.
Mm-hmm. Is there any recourse for someone when they are stripped of their security clearance?
Generally, yes. In fact, there's an executive order that President Clinton issued back in 1995 that mandates due process. Every agency has internal regulations about the governance of due process. In writing, in hearings, in personal appearances, there are mechanisms to strip someone of due process. And in the 33 years that I've been a lawyer, I have only had that happen once. And when that happened about 15 years ago inside the Defense Intelligence Agency, no one at the time had ever heard of that happening before.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't heard of another case since. But there are laws on the books that could happen. I will say, with respect to what Trump keeps doing, both with his executive order against my clients, the 8 out of the 51, and now against me and my peers in this go round in the New York Post, they did not invoke the provisions in the laws that allows the existence or application of due process to be stripped from us. They've done things just very sloppily, and without due consideration and thought. Which that's the one thing actually that surprised me. I really thought coming into Trump 2.0 that they were going to be much better at what they were doing from the first go round, because now they had the experience. They know how to write things, they know how to do things. But I'm not seeing it. I'm just not seeing that happen. The people who are writing these just don't seem to have the experience and understanding of actually what the law is. So that gives us holes of which we could push through to pursue, as you've seen in everyone, all these legal challenges that have been successful for the most part so far. And that's one of the reasons why.
Is suing an option for reinstatement?
So security clearances are a totally different creature than a lot of what else we're seeing, like with the firing of the special counsel, the firing of the inspector generals, the firing of a judge on the Merit System Protection Board or the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission. Security clearance, there is a case by the Supreme Court from 1988 called Department of Navy versus Egan that basically says, and has been interpreted to say, although I think this is a wrong interpretation, but that's not for me to say. I'm just a lawyer, not a judge. But it says essentially that federal courts do not have jurisdiction over substantive clearance determinations. So I may be able to sue over the lack of procedural and substantive due process, well, more procedural, not given to me. What I can't sue on is their determination that I am now untrustworthy. That's an executive branch determination, not one that can be judicially reviewed, unless we get that case back up to the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to review, to be able to look at what is really a common sense determination, which is what actually the Department of Defense rules characterize it as with respect to a clearance decision. So again, the easy example being, Mark Zaid has had a clearance for the last 20 plus years without any concern, including by you, Trump administration 1.0. So what exactly did he do suddenly in Trump 2.0 to not deserve a clearance other than, be a thorn in your hornet's nest type situation for political reasons?
I'm no attorney, but it would strike me as defamation on some level if someone is wrongfully pegged as untrustworthy.
Well,
professionally.
I can confer a legal degree on you because I think your assessment is accurate. Because that, defamation per se is something that is false, that impugns someone in their workplace, which obviously this does. Calling me untrustworthy, that I've committed misconduct, done something wrong, that that could absolutely be a claim for defamation. The problem is, under our legal system, in order to pursue a claim of defamation against the United States, or a claim against the United States, a tort, which that would be, the government needs to waive its immunity. And under the Federal Tort Claims Act and other provisions in existing law, the U.S. government does not waive immunity for defamation or false light claims. So I would just hit a brick wall. And that's existed for years and years and years and years. Has nothing to do with the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned before that there's been a lot of lawsuits that have been filed, and we've seen the courts rebuke him on a number of occasions. I would imagine a lot of these cases will ultimately work their way through the appellate courts and up to the Supreme Court. We just saw this morning that 8 of the, I think, 18 inspectors general who Trump fired just filed suit to get their jobs back. What's the latest on your FBI litigation? And where do you think these, and we'll talk about the Supreme Court and the nuclear option in a second, which everybody's talking about, but where do you think these lawsuits ultimately may be successful?
So the FBI case, we negotiated with the government an agreement to effectively put in place what we requested, which was a temporary restraining order to prevent the U.S. government from releasing the names of FBI personnel who worked on the January 6th cases. That stays in place until the court will rule on the motion for preliminary injunction or permanent injunction, which will be filed on February 24th. And then there'll be briefing on both sides, and there'll be oral arguments on that motion on March 27th. Now, the government has the option with 2 business days notice to release the names. And were it to invoke that caveat exception in the agreement, we would go immediately back into court for another TRO to stop that from occurring. Whether that will happen, we'll see. It's a very frustrating case, obviously, even more so, I think, than some of the other cases that I've seen my colleagues file, particularly because, as I told the judge, I can't believe I'm arguing against the U.S. government, against the U.S. Attorney's Office, who routinely, obviously, would be protecting the FBI and its officials on a daily basis, that I have to argue that this is actually a matter of contention, that they would actually do this. But we'll see, because, we live in a different world right now. And this administration, as it's said multiple times, they've created now this weaponization committee that's supposed to do this internal review of what FBI officials engaged in the January 6th prosecutions, which is, frankly, ludicrous, other than if they find some real misconduct. Did an FBI agent take a bribe? Oh, my God. Yeah, absolutely. That person should be fired. Did an FBI agent cover up knowledge of a defendant and steer the other way? Which is exactly the opposite, of course, what the Trump administration is interested in. That would be a problem. But did an FBI agent find evidence, open a case, and then let that case progress through its natural course of life, which would be to lawyers in the Justice Department, to a grand jury, to a federal judge? To think that a case got all the way through a conviction or a plea, and somehow there was misconduct that was inappropriate, that impacted the guilt of that individual somewhere way, 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 way back. I can't even, I struggle with even trying to understand how that could be.
Well, part of the alternate universe you just mentioned is something you posted about on Twitter, I think yesterday, that Alina Habba had said. She's one of his attorneys, and she said, quote, "There's a separation of powers for a reason. The executive branch is the ultimate authority on federal issues."
J.D. Vance tweeted out the other day that's caused a lot of issues that was similar to that, but not as far. Now, and I read there's an op-ed in, I think it's the Wall Street Journal today, as we're taping this, written by a Harvard law professor that I don't know anything about the guy. I don't know where he falls on things, but I generally agreed with what he said, which was that there is a legal argument, certainly, that the executive branch can promote with respect to separation of powers as to where the executive has power versus the judiciary or the legislative branch. We call it the political question doctrine. And there are many cases in which a federal judge at every level, up to the Supreme Court, has said, nope, that is a political question. That is not for us to decide. Very similar to what I mentioned about the security clearances, where the judicial branch has said that is the prerogative of the executive branch. So if we're talking about the concern that a federal judge may overstep his or her bounds and go too far into the prerogative of the executive branch, by all means, raise that as an argument. And there have been judges who at the district level who then get slapped down at the appellate level. But if we're talking about that, by its very nature, whatever the president of the United States says, does, or orders, that is non-reviewable, then no, I have a problem. I and a lot of people have a real problem with that.
And the other side of that coin is, if the judge is merely upholding the Constitution, that's not overreach, is it?
Yeah, no. And some of the examples, I guess, that Vance gave was, the courts can't tell the president how to instruct a general to do battle. And in a general rule, that would be true. If it's an illegal order, that is certainly reviewable by a court. This is what I did in the anthrax vaccination cases that seems now forever ago because it was over 20 years ago, where, the Secretary of Defense ordered everyone to get an anthrax vaccination in the military. And we challenged it, and we reversed that as being an illegal order, of which courts can rule upon. So, it is a real question. There is a three-part system, right? Three branches of government, of which each of it, like Congress controls the purse. We're going to get into a debate potentially, if the Republicans allow for it, as to whether or not what President Trump is doing with dismantling agencies that Congress created, or doing anything that invokes the power of the purse, which is the control of Congress, any monetary issues. There are lanes for each of the branches. Now, the concern that we are really talking about and people are raising of, are we in a constitutional crisis? We're in a crisis. We're in chaos. I don't think we're in a constitutional crisis yet. I think we're getting there. Where it would be for me, that line would be a federal court issuing an order and the Trump administration refuses to abide by it. That to me is a step into the constitutional crisis. And this is going to be a real problem. And quite frankly, I expect it to happen. I really do. Sad to say, I expect it to happen. And it may happen at the district court level, the circuit court level. It may even happen at the Supreme Court level. That would be the real ultimate constitutional crisis. And it raises some real serious issues of which I have no answers. And I'm not even sure who does, because it's a horrific Civil War type situation, frankly. And it would run something like this. A district judge rules that the federal government executive branch has to stop this or do that, whatever it might be, and they say no. And it goes up on appeal properly, and then that's fine, right? If they continue to appeal decisions, that's part of the process. That's perfectly fine. But ultimately, they refuse to do it. Now, what are the powers of the court? Well, they can hold the government or individuals in contempt, criminally and civilly. The problem now with criminally is that the Supreme Court case, obviously, that was decided last year says if Donald Trump or the president is acting in the course of their official duties, they are criminally immune. And okay, so what if you hold criminally in contempt the people beneath him. Yeah, but then he can just pardon them every time the court does that. So we're stuck. All right. How about civil contempt? Civil contempt could actually lead to jail, and a federal judge could order jail time for someone in civil contempt. That's a civil matter. The president has no pardon authority over that at all. But who's going to enforce the civil contempt? That's the requirement or obligation of the Marshal Service, which is run by the executive branch, the president. So what would happen if the court orders their marshals, who work there every single day, to take into custody, so-and-so inside the administration, and then the president tells the marshals, no, don't? This is the reminiscent of 1832, when President Jackson was told by the Supreme Court, you can't wipe out the Native Americans. And he said, well, you and what army are going to enforce that order? And while 1832 is not 2025, there's not very much that's the same between, the last 200 years. Nonetheless, that is the same, right? Supreme Court and the federal judiciary has no army. And the enforcement mechanism, frankly, has been and is the executive branch. So I have no answers. That's above my pay grade as to what happens in that scenario. But I'm fearful and concerned to say that I expect it.
Yeah, well, I think what you said before about it's a civil war-like scenario is accurate, because I think it will fall on the electorate. I mean, anytime in this country's history there's been transformational change to rid ourselves of injustice, whether it's freeing ourselves from the monarchy back in the Revolutionary era, to civil rights, to the Vietnam War, it's people taking to the streets. And I think he does not have a mandate. I mean, half of this country, more than half, did not vote for him. And so that's a chilling scenario. I like to hold out that he's a coward deep down. He's not a fighter. Okay. That would require a major fight on his part. He just wants to be loved. And I think we've seen many cases where at the end of the day, he'll even throw his most loyal aides under a bus if he thinks what they're doing is going to make him not loved. So I don't know. I always say maybe I'm just a delusional libtard, but
he'll embrace his most hated enemy.
Yes,
they start to act nice to him.
Yeah, so I think
it goes both ways.
I just think he'll find his way out of that mess. He always does.
When I say civil war, I'm certainly not advocating, and I don't think what our country experienced by way of history, the Civil War in 1861 to 65, that America is also very different than our America today, right? States do not have the power that they had then. The federal government was weak then. There was a unity of states to break away from the federal government to fight. They were in control of their armed forces, their militias, their state units. And we've run lots of hypothetical scenarios, many groups have, about how this works now, right? Sure, there are national guards that are under the control of the governors, but they can be federalized, and they ultimately report to the president of the United States. So we're not in a posture where that type of civil war could happen. Would there be civil unrest, protests? I mean,
that's what I mean, basically.
Yeah, that's what January 6th was in the opposite direction. Right. I mean, but even then, as much as some of them were insurrectionists by definition under the law, that was just really a mob at the end of the day doing stupid things and deserved to be punished for it. I don't know what will happen. I will tell you what my expectations are as we go further into this administration. Right now they're saying Donald Trump's got a 53% approval rating. This is what most Americans want. They love seeing the disruption in the government. They love seeing the shrinking of the government. They love seeing people being fired and things like that. And I don't have any doubt that's all true, because for the most part, the vast majority of Americans aren't yet personally impacted by anything that is occurring. For people like you and me, you who focus on this, this means something to you and me, who's surrounded by it. These are my friends, colleagues, peers, and clients who are being impacted. I feel it personally for, as we talked about with my clearance, but most people aren't being impacted. But they will be. They will be when their services start to slow down or cease, when they don't get their Medicaid or Medicare benefits, when they don't get their mail, when they realize their spouses are being deported because they're illegal, or their workers, or there's no one to do this or that, or their eggs are now $15 a dozen because of what's going on, or their stock portfolio has collapsed, or the tariffs have been imposed, and all of a sudden their groceries are more money. There will be a time, I think, when folks it hits them personally in Iowa, Nebraska, you name the state that is the reddest of the red, and they're like, wait a minute, that is not what I thought was going to happen or voted for. And then we'll start to see turnaround. When Musk is about to go in with Doge to the Pentagon, you wait to see when things start getting cut and military bases in red congressional districts start getting impacted. And all of a sudden, I do think you'll start to see Republicans, both the voter base and in the Congress, start pushing back. And that will be the checks and balances. What I can't predict is when will that happen?
Yeah, I think you're right. Most people don't understand how it affects them. For example, cutting the Department of Education. Well, guess who pays for physical or occupational therapy in public schools when your kid has problems? That funding comes through the Department of Education. Look, we've seen a report today about inflation. It was the worst report in 3 years. And if it's truly the economy, stupid, and people truly voted for Trump because of the eggs and gas and housing and the cost of everything, then the impact of his trade wars, the impact of other things that he's doing is going to be felt by people. The question is, was that really why they voted for him, or was it something else? Because we also see people making excuses for that kind of stuff or blaming Biden. But I do think you're right. And then that's to my point about ultimately it landing on the doorstep of the electorate. It's up to the people to decide whether they're getting served by their government. That's the thing. It's a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Like, it's our taxes that pay for it all. This isn't Trump's government. It's not Musk's government. It's our government. And if we start to feel like the people we put in office aren't delivering for us, then that's where we get to speak out in every election, or in between, calling the congressional offices. The question is, are people going to do that? Or are some people, his supporters, going to say, yeah, but? That's the big question.
I mean, the midterm elections in 2026 will be fascinating. And from a political standpoint, from a history standpoint, just the biggest problem surrounding is we're not even a month in, and I feel like it's been like a decade. I can't imagine having to wait 2 more years to get to the midterm elections. It's going to be a long 2 years, but that could change around everything. Obviously, every House member is up for re-election, as is the case every 2 years, and about a third of the Senate is up for re-election. Most of those would be viewed as safe seats both ways, but because so much chaos is happening, I would dare say I don't think any analysis of what could happen in 2 years could be made now, because too many things could happen.
Sure.
And if the Senate and the House could flip, I guarantee you Trump will be impeached. I have no doubt about it. I predicted that in 2017 in January, and I took a lot of heat from it simply because I tweeted it out. I never played a role in it at all, because I'm not political, and that's not my job. But if the House and Senate goes Democrat, and he'll be impeached not because they want him out, which of course they do. He'll be impeached because he will commit a high crime and a misdemeanor per the Constitution, or however the wording is going. I might have mangled that a tiny bit. But he will commit a crime. I have no doubt about it, because that is what he does.
Mark, appreciate the insights. Do come back soon for another update.
Anytime, Andy. Appreciate it.
All righty. Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg, and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast. and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.